Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jesse Vergala, and you're listening to Working Capital, the real estate podcast. My special guest today is Yaron Brook. Yaron is chairman of the board of the Ayn Rand Institute. He is also the host of the Yaron Brook Show. You can check that out on YouTube and anywhere you get podcasts. Yaron has been I've been a big fan of yours for quite some time now. A number of books that we'll talk about today that you have written and co-authored. You've talked about business ethics, economic policy, financial markets, objectivism, a lot to talk about. And as I tell guests on this podcast, I don't just like to speak about real estate. I like to talk about philosophy, economics, and things that impact our lives on a daily basis. Yaron, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Well, first of all, welcome to Working Capital. I think for those that, just from the outset of a little bit of a bio of yours, you can YouTube Yaron, see him on kind of Lex Friedman's podcast, Dave Rubin, anywhere that you can get visual or podcast media. It seems like you're there, Yaron.
I try to get out there, try to get the message out there. And yeah, the ton of talks and lectures of mine up online that I've given over the years on a wide variety of issues, a lot of debates that I've done, all of that's available on YouTube.
Yeah. And I think finance was where you did
I got a PhD in finance. I was a finance professor for many years. So, and I involved in a hedge fund. So I've got a lot of balls up in the air.
Yeah. Well, for those that don't know, I play a business grad on TV, but prior to a lot of the kind of graduate work I did, my undergrad was in philosophy. So, the kind of discussion about policy as it relates to kind of our disposition in the world and how that touches other aspects of our lives, our vocation, economic policy. I think the first time I read your work was Equal is Unfair, and I think it was the title itself. I was like, that's an interesting one there. So Yaron, for those that don't know a bit of your background, how you got into this space, it doesn't seem like a finance PhD into kind of Ayn Rand and objectivism. So maybe a little bit for those that don't know who you are.
Sure. No, I mean, my life was changed by Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's magnus opus that I read when I was 16 years old. I think it's a book everybody should read, particularly if you're interested in business and economics and the world and philosophy. It is a must read. And my life she blew me away when I read that book. And really, from age 16 on, I've been struggling to understand the philosophy, apply it, implement it in my life, apply it to my understanding of the rest of the world. And I've been on a quest to learn. And she wrote a lot of other books. Ayn Rand wrote a lot of other books that help in that quest and contribute to that quest. But fundamentally, was Atlas. So I've been I'm an engineering undergraduate. I've got an MBA. I've got a PhD in finance. I was a finance professor, but I've always on the side been studying Ayn Rand's ideas and Ayn Rand's philosophy. So when the opportunity came about to become the CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute about 20 something years ago, I jumped on that. It was a dream come true in a sense, and did that for 17 years. And now I'm chairman of the board and kind of an independent public intellectual with my own show. But it really is all centered around this philosophy, this way of looking at life and the world that Ayn Rand developed.
So objectivism is the philosophy that she developed. And, for those that want a quick primer for Ayn Rand, if you want to see something quick on YouTube, I think there's a Donahue 30-minute on Donahue from the 70s or 80s, which I thought was, it's an interesting kind of back and forth. But in terms of the philosophy itself, I find that even on your video with Lex Friedman, there was kind of this question of, that it's in the popular world, pop finance or self-help. And then there's kind of philosophers that either really, really like her or really, really dislike her work. And could you kind of, why do you think that's kind of the general sentiment as somebody else outside looking in?
Well, look, almost all philosophers hate her work. I mean, they despise it, they dismiss it, and they don't want to have anything to do with it. And the primary reason I think for that is that she challenges pretty much all of conventional philosophy. She turns philosophy upside down. On every question, she has, almost every question, she has an original, new, different answer to a question that philosophers have been debating for 2,000 years. And they find that ridiculous, right? Because they've been trained to think in a particular way within the scope of particular answers to questions, bounded by what other philosophers, starting with Plato and Aristotle, have been talking about for 2,500 years. And somebody comes in and throws in a grenade, in a sense, or offers something completely different, and does it primarily in the form of a novel, primarily in English. In other words, in a language that a common person can understand, not in philosophy speak. That is very disturbing to them, and it turns the world upside down. And most of them don't really take it seriously. They don't spend the time to engage with it to figure out if there's anything there. And those who do are offended by it and walk away. On the other hand, I think she has had a profound impact on our culture, on the world around us. Not as much as I'd like, but still, she's had one. People, millions and millions of people all over the world have read Atlas Shrugged. Just as an aside, Atlas Shrugged was the #1 best-selling book in Ukraine in 2015 and 2016. Right? It came out in 3 volumes, and it sold everywhere. And she has a profound impact on the people who read it. Some people hate it and put it aside. Some people are maybe bored by it, and it doesn't have any impact. But most people, even people who don't agree with it, are impacted by it. So I'll give you a few examples. Almost every one of the founders of Silicon Valley was impacted by Ayn Rand. You go back to the original venture capitalists, at least 2 of the founders of Sequoia Capital, the biggest venture capital fund, most successful maybe in history. 2 of them, huge Ayn Rand fan. And my guess is many, many more within the venture community. If you go through the big founders, Wozniak says that Steve Jobs was heavily influenced by Atlas Shrugged, Michael Dell, Larry Ellison, Sam McNeely, Sun Microsystems, almost everything. And Andreessen, almost every single one of them have read Atlas Shrugged. The founder of Uber was a big Fountainhead fan. So she had a huge impact on the entrepreneurial culture in this country and in motivating. They don't agree with her ideas necessarily, but she provided them with that self-help, go for it, don't settle, stick to principle, fight for your values kind of attitude. I think she injected it or helped preserve it in the culture. And then if you look at, S&P 500 companies, certainly 20, 30 years ago, a dominant number of CEOs had that view. I think that a lot of the self-help movements over the last 40 years has been inspired by self-esteem, for example. Self-esteem is a concept she was talking about in the 50s. There was no self-esteem movement in the 50s. Now, they perverted the concept of self-esteem. It's gone in directions that I think she wouldn't support. But again, introducing the idea of self-esteem, esteeming yourself, that's a revolutionary idea, and she brought it into the culture. And I'd even say the attitude towards capitalism. I don't know that we would have had a Reagan and Thatcher revolution without people like Rand. Certainly Milton Friedman and von Mises and Hayek also contributed to that. But without Rand and Atlas Shrugged providing kind of a heroic moral perspective on the value and benefits of capitalism, I'm not sure you would have had those political revolutions. One of the sad things is that those revolutions have dissipated and are gone, and nobody represents them anywhere in the political world today. But it's her work as being a part of the culture and influenced that part of the culture in spite of the frowning and the dismissal of the intellectual class.
So would you take us for somebody that's looking into objectivism? I think a lot of this starts at the individual level, at the individualism aspect, where it's almost people a little older than me and a little younger than me. I think it's just kind of gone without saying that there's a collectivist nature in how we're taught things. I know that it's influenced, education that I've seen at a young age. And it was something that 20, 30 years before me wasn't just assumed that it was a collectivist framework that we kind of lived out of. So could you talk a little bit about what the emphasis is on the individual from her philosophy and why that's important and, kind of what transpires out of that?
Yeah, I mean, what's unique about her philosophy, and unique historically, so unique for hundreds of years, not just unique in the last few years, is that she's a moral individualist. She believes that the purpose of your life, your moral purpose, your ethical purpose, is your own success, your own flourishing, your own flourishing as a human being, your own ability to live your life to the maximum, to live the best life you can possibly live as given your nature as a human being. And that is really your moral responsibility. That's what morality is about, to teach you how to live a good life. Now, nobody teaches that, right? Almost every other philosophy tells you morality, the purpose of morality is, I don't know, to not lie to your neighbor and to sacrifice for the common good and to know your place in society and to morality in every other context is a way of putting you down as an individual and placing something else above you, something more important to you, whether it's the class or the race or the state or the proletarian or whatever. Something is God, something is more important than you are. And morality is putting you in your place. And she's saying, no, morality, and here she echoes Aristotle, morality is a tool. It should teach you how to live well, how on principle you should guide your life in pursuit of your own happiness. And that's a massive revolution. And her answer to how to do that is also, in a sense, revolutionary, because there might be people out there, yeah, I want to find fulfillment in my life, so I'm gonna take some acid, or I'm gonna go and sleep around with anybody who'll sleep with me, or whatever, kind of an emotionalist attitude, which you see a lot, kind of on the left, or I'm going to follow commandments. I want to be happy, so I'm going to do what somebody else decides is good for me, and I'll follow them. And she says, no, to really achieve happiness, to really live the best life you can, you have to live in accordance with your nature as a human being. And your nature as a human being is as a rational animal. So to live a good life, you have to follow reason. You have to follow your mind. You have to think. You could boil her entire morality down to think, right? Figure it out, solve problems, use your mind. She doesn't reject or denounce emotions. She just says emotions are not tools of cognition. They're not ways of knowing the world, and they're not ways of making decisions about the world. Decisions should be made by the use of reason, by the use of your mind. And she says, echoing the Enlightenment in some respect, but even more forcefully, reason is the way we know the world. Reason is the only way in which we know the world, and that's the one faculty that you have that you must cultivate and you must make part of who you are and make as the primary guide to how you live your life.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think for me, at least, part of the abrasiveness I think that people have with her is they read titles like The Virtue of Selfishness, or they hear taglines that altruism isn't a virtue. Could you talk to that a little bit? Because I know that there's been, I heard you speaking with, I think it was Ben Shapiro, or there was a clip of a back and forth where, is it just words? Is it just verbiage that we're mixing up when we're talking about altruism? But I think it's a little different, because the picture you described to me kind of reminds me of, the mother on the plane that gives herself oxygen first before she gives it to her child. So you build yourself up before you can kind of do that for others. But can you talk a little bit about that concept of altruism and how she views it differently than the way we typically?
I mean, I don't like the way the oxygen mask thing, because the way you present the oxygen mask thing is the purpose is to help your neighbor. And in order to help your neighbor, you have to first put on your oxygen in yourself so you can help the neighbor. And I'm tempted to say, to hell with my neighbor. I don't believe that, but I'm tempted to say it, because the purpose of putting on the oxygen mask is for me to survive. Now, put aside if it's my child. My child is part of me, right? But I'm not helping the stranger until I put my mask on, not because I need to help the stranger. It's because I need to survive. That's the primary thing I need to do. And then once I'm surviving, why not be benevolent towards your stranger and help him put on the mask and help him survive as well? But the purpose is you. And so I don't want to soften it. Altruism is a philosophical concept. Rand viewed as evil. It's fundamentally, essentially evil, because the concept of altruism comes from a philosopher by the name of Auguste Comte in the 19th century. He's a Frenchman. But look, it's the same concept that's in Christianity. It's the same concept that's in Kant. It's the same concept that's in much of the philosophy of the West. The concept of altruism says that the moral purpose of your life is to serve other people. It's to live for other people. And indeed, to be virtuous, to be good, is to sacrifice to other people. What does sacrifice mean in this context? Not the way Jordan Peterson kind of tries to explain it in a shallow, ridiculous way, which is, I'm doing something now to gain greater benefit in the future. That's not a sacrifice. You know exactly what that is from real estate. It's called an investment. That's not a sacrifice. When you make an investment in a property and you're giving up money now with expectation of a cash flow in the future, you would never call that a sacrifice. That's an investment. Yeah. What a sacrifice is a loss. You're giving something up without expecting anything in return. Mm-hmm. Not an investment. It's a sacrifice. So altruism requires you to sacrifice. It requires you to lose. And what are you losing in? You're losing in the game of life. You're losing life. And Rand says, why? Why should you live for other people? It doesn't mean you should be nasty to other people. It doesn't mean you shouldn't help other people. But why should I live for other people? Why should I lose for other people? What Rand is promoting is the idea of win-win relationships, which we understand from business. We understand from markets. You should always look to gain in life. You should always move forward in life, never backwards, never lose. But not at other people's expense, because that's not the best way to move forward in life. The best way to move forward in life is by trading with other people in win-win relationships where you gain and they gain. We know that's how trade works, but that's how spiritual values work. You're not going to have a successful marriage if you're constantly losing, or if your spouse is constantly losing. You're only going to have a successful marriage if you're both winning, if you're both moving forward. So, and sacrifice doesn't mean I don't get to go to my favorite Chinese restaurant today because my wife wants to eat Italian. I mean, that's silly, right? If I hated Italian, if I despised Italian, if Italian made me sick, then yeah, that would be a sacrifice. But then my wife would want me to go to an Italian restaurant because she values me. But sacrifice means that I do something that clearly hurts me, that moves me backwards, not that is some optional value where it doesn't really matter. We can go to Chinese tomorrow, right? So again, it doesn't mean not helping other people, because helping other people can be a value, right? Other people are value to you. They're alive. They are productive human beings. Most people are good people. They're a value to you. I mean, people water their plants. So a human being is a lot more valuable than a plant. So no, the perspective is I'm doing this for me. But what that means to do something for me is very expansive, because other people are value to me. Mm-hmm. Certainly if they're close to me, certainly if it's my wife or my kids or my family or my friends, but even strangers are value to me because they're human. But look, if it's my child or a stranger, it's my child. And I'm not embarrassed by that. I'm proud of the fact that I will always take my child over the stranger's child. So the idea of selfishness, or the idea of self-interest, and the idea of altruism have been perverted in the culture. So altruism means opening doors to somebody. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course, there's no problem with opening doors. But if the opening door is going to slow you down and they can make it so you don't get to the hospital and your child dies as a consequence, don't open the door, right? So, but altruism demands that, to hell with your values. What matters is their values. What matters is not your happiness. What matters is their happiness. What matters is the mask on the guy next door. And if there's limited oxygen, take off your mask so he can have it. Right?
That makes sense. So in terms of you mentioned the entrepreneurs that, Atlas Shrugged, or that philosophy in general was, I don't think it's a surprise that entrepreneurs have that impact. And a lot of this in your work gets trickled down into, mind the pun, into capitalism and our outlook on the best way to organize society from a business standpoint, or businesses in the market. What do you think that we've lost, that we've kind of switched to an assumption of basically trying to game the system so everyone is purely equal at the end of the day. And I think that book, Equal is Unfair, I recommend it to anybody interested in kind of hearing a bit more about this. But it's almost the default position now that we kind of game the outcomes. And how do we get here?
Yeah, I mean, this is the battle philosophy that started with Plato and Aristotle, and still going on. Basically, there's always been a move in the world towards some kind of as equality as a standard, as equality as an end in itself, equality not of liberty, not of freedom, not of rights, but equality of outcomes. And there's always been this egalitarian movement, and it's only grown with modern philosophy, as modern philosophy has taught us that individuals don't matter, that the human mind is impotent, that we need groups in order to survive, that we need others, and we should sacrifice to others. Goes back to the altruism. It's been popularized that the idea is that the standard should be, and they give a variety of different reasons why this is, some kind of equality of outcome for everybody. And nobody has an answer to that. Like the right says, oh, no, we don't like equality of outcome because it leads to bad things. We want equality of opportunity, which is a complete cop-out because opportunity is a kind of an outcome. It's just another outcome. So you're still going to have to sacrifice some people for other people in order to give everybody equal opportunities. So equality has become almost a religion, a religious kind of concept that certainly the left embraces and the right has no answer to. So the alternative is hierarchies. Again, Jordan Peterson, lobsters standing on one another. But that's like a dog-eat-dog kind of world. That's the kind of world where we exploit other people to get ahead. We're not lobsters, right? And what Ayn Rand is offering us is a world in which we can anybody who's willing to be productive, anybody who's willing to work for a living, anybody who's willing to go out there and make something of their life, we can all get ahead together, but not at the same pace because we're not the same. And some of us will gain slower, and some of us will gain faster, and that's just the nature of reality. And there's nothing negative about that. There's nothing bad about that. On the contrary, the fact that we're all of different abilities is a good thing because I benefit enormously from the existence of the Steve Jobs and the Jeff Bezos and the Larry, and the Larry Ellisons of the world. I benefit enormously from the products that they have made possible. So I'm glad that there are people smarter than me. I'm glad that there are people who are more entrepreneurial than me and who have the ability to create massive companies that I don't have. I can trade with him. I can make enough of a living so I can trade with Jeff Bezos and get my Amazon packages. He benefits, I benefit, nobody loses. And that's the world in which I want to live. I want to live in a world of win-win relationships where, yeah, we're all unequal. Of course we're unequal. There's no way to make us equal other than by massive violence. But where we all have the opportunity to benefit from one another through trade, through voluntary exchange.
That makes sense. Yaron, I want to be mindful of the time that we have here, but I do have to ask you, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the current environment as it relates to the economy, where interest rates are at right now as a result of kind of the Fed doing their thing over the last year. Our listeners that are investors, real estate or otherwise, it's something that for a lot of people my age and especially younger than me, they've never gone through this before, where they've seen, the fiscal or monetary policy where people have just come in and basically upended a lot of investments. What's your take on how the Fed has handled the last year and a half, and kind of what's your diagnosis of the potential problem here?
Well, my view is that in a sense, that's the wrong framing. Because it's not that the Fed has mismanaged the last year and a half. The fact is that the Fed has mismanaged the last 75 years. And in particular, the Fed has mismanaged the last 15 years, certainly since the financial crisis. But of course, the financial crisis was caused by the Fed mismanaging interest rates from 2001 until 2007. So it's all the Fed, right? The Fed is a disaster, and it always has been, and always will be, and it's never going to get better because the Fed fundamentally is trying to do a job that it is impossible to do. It is trying to centrally plan the economy, and it's trying to do it through the use of price fixing. We know price fixing doesn't work when it's oil or when it's iPhones or when it's bread. But we think somehow that if we take the most important price in the world, money, interest rates, in other words, we can fix that price and we can set it right. And it would just get a group of 12 economists together in a room, or even not economists. I don't think Paul's an economist. And they'll hash it out. They'll figure it out. They've got smart PhDs behind them. But central planning doesn't work. Never has, never will. And they can't get interest rates right. They never will get interest rates right. And I don't know if they've raised interest rates too slow, too fast, too high, too low. There is no answer to that. There's no answer to that. But I can tell you that they kept interest rates way too low for way too long. We are suffering today from the consequence of zero interest rates. We're suffering today the inevitable consequence of running an economy on artificially low interest rates that made no sense. That were driven by QE1, QE2, QE3, QE. I mean, people forget, right? Particularly if you're young, you don't remember, 10, 50, but you can't understand anything about what's going on right now without understanding what happened 10, 15 years ago. So interest rates were too low. Our federal government, doesn't matter who's president, our federal government spent like there was no tomorrow because they could borrow money ad infinitum at zero interest rates. I would borrow money ad infinitum if you gave it to me at zero interest rates. So they borrowed like crazy. They spent it all. Of course, our government doesn't invest the money that they borrow in productive activity that generates cash flow to them. Quite the contrary, they waste the money. And tax revenues don't go up because they spend money, right? So the revenues don't change. They don't cause the economy to grow. They cause the economy to shrink, if anything. Our government spent money. Our government sent us money so that we could spend it, which caused inflation. And the Fed is increasing interest rates to try to fight inflation. Okay. But, blaming the Fed for this is like, what are they supposed to do? They've been given an impossible task. They've taken on an impossible task that cannot be done right. They're bound to destroy. Now, where this all lands up, I think it's hard to tell. It's very easy to be pessimistic. Again, I've been around for a long time, so I've seen these ups and downs, and I'm surrounded by people who say, "This time we're falling off a cliff. Yeah. This time it's the end. The dollar is going to collapse. Everybody's going to shift to the yuan or to gold or to Bitcoin. It's just a matter of days where everything is going to collapse and we're back in the dark ages." And I've learned, as somebody who was tempted by that for many years, I've learned that doesn't work quite that way. We have an amazingly resilient economy, primarily because of entrepreneurs, primarily because there are people out there who are working for a living and producing and creating stuff, and they keep figuring out ways to get around this. So in spite of all the damage our government and our Fed does, individuals, entrepreneurs manage to somehow keep this economy going. It's not Biden. It's not Powell. It wasn't Trump. It wasn't anybody. Politicians have very little impact on economic growth. Economic growth is a consequence of what you do, of what your listeners do, of the investments they make, of the entrepreneurial activity they engage in. And our economy is unbelievably resilient to the stupidity of our politicians and our central planners. And we manage along. Now, real estate is going to get hit. It has been hit already. It's going to continue to get hit because, as I keep telling my audiences, when you raise interest rates, the value of assets goes down. It just does. That's just math. It's not ominous. It's not the demon. It's just math. And as long as interest rates go up, values go down. But you know what? Is that a bad thing that values go down? I mean, maybe values are too high because interest rates were zero. When interest rates are zero, all asset prices go way up. Does that make sense? Obviously not. So maybe this is more of us just returning to normalcy. We'll see what happens. I've been predicting a recession for a year now or more, maybe. So I'm a little hesitant. I still think there's going to be a recession, but again, the resilience of the U.S. economy is truly something to marvel at.
Well, I like Howard Marks's famous last words, and I think kind of to your point, people saying this time it's different and being very cautious about that type of outlook. I think the other thing you mentioned Hayek earlier, despite everything that goes on in our society, the central planning, there's seems to be an emergent order between relationships of us pursuing our self-interest, whether that's starting a tire company or investing in a property, and having, the relationships that you and I and others have together seems to be, like you said, in spite of everything, it seems to be that spirit.
I mean, I don't particularly like the emergent order phrasing or spontaneous order, because it's not spontaneous and it's not emergent. It's you. It's individuals actually doing stuff. Because there are other cultures in which the emergent order never emerges, because people, for whatever reason, cultural or otherwise, they just don't do this stuff. Entrepreneurs are what make the world move forward, or what create economic activity. And as long as there's entrepreneurial activity, there is hope that we can avoid the consequence of disastrous government policies.
Yaron, for those that are looking to kind of get more information of yourself, the Institute, where can we send them? And if you could leave Atlas Shrugged to the side, if you could leave a couple books that you would suggest for listeners, we'll put them in the show notes.
So AynRand.org to find out about everything you need to know about Ayn Rand, AynRand.org. To find me, just Google my name. I mean, I'm all over the place, but certainly I've got a YouTube channel that I hope some of you subscribe to. I'm on Twitter. You can follow me there. And of course, any podcasting app carries my YouTube videos. And in terms of books, just pick up anything by Ayn Rand. I mean, I think that Fountainhead, and if you're interested in architecture, Fountainhead, as you might be if you're in real estate, Fountainhead is a great book for that. It's about an architect, but it has some phenomenal philosophy. And then Capitalism, Not an Unknown Ideal, Philosophy, Who Needs It? The book you mentioned earlier, The Virtue of Selfishness. Don't be intimidated by the title. It's one of the best reads you'll ever have. And pretty much just pick up something by Ayn Rand. I think it'll really cause you to think differently about the world, and it'll open up a whole set of new possibilities for you.
My guest today has been Yaron Brook. Yaron, thanks for being part of Working Capital.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.